Hi, it's Steve Goldstein. I'm the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. I will be doing the briefing today, and I'm joined by Brian Hook. Of note, I'm happy to say that Heather's son is doing much better, and I would expect her back at the podium next Tuesday. And no one will be more happier to see her than I. What we're going to do first is have Brian give you a briefing on Vancouver. He'll then take 4 or 5 questions, and then he has to go back to his office, and then I will come back up, answer additional questions, and then we'll go around the world trying to respond to whatever you might have. So first let me introduce Brian Hook, who I think many of you know is the Director of Policy Planning for the Secretary. Brian?
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon to all of you. The Vancouver Foreign Ministers meeting on security and stability in the Korean Peninsula will be held in Vancouver on January 16th. The United States and Canada are convening the meeting to demonstrate international commitment to diplomatic solutions to the escalating threat posed by DPRK's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. The goal of the ministerial is to provide a practical mechanisms to exert continued pressure on the Kim regime while demonstrating that diplomatic options remain open and viable. The invitation list is largely based on countries who are UN command sending states, which are the countries that send combat support and/or humanitarian aid to support the Republic of Korea during the Korean War. There is growing evidence that our maximum pressure campaign is being felt in North Korea. They are feeling the strain. And we believe that this pressure campaign remains the best avenue to force change in Kim Jong-un's behavior and to get him to the negotiating table for meaningful discussions. Among the issues we will be discussing is how the international community can thwart North Korean efforts to evade UN sanctions through smuggling. As you know, with the Secretary's patient diplomacy, together with our allies and partners around the world, the administration has increased pressure on the DPRK to new and unprecedented levels. Combined with previous UN Security Council resolutions, over 90% of North Korea's publicly reported exports as of 2016 are now banned. Many countries are further taking unilateral action to hold the DPRK accountable. And let me give you a few examples. Malaysia kicked out North Korean laborers. Qatar and Kuwait halted work visas to North Koreans. The UAE has completely severed diplomatic ties. Peru, Spain, and Italy have all expelled ambassadors. Portugal froze all diplomatic relations with the DPRK in July. As I think, as I've mentioned in prior interactions with you, in every bilat, the Secretary brings up North Korea. And he has done that since the time that we had reached agreement on a North Korea strategy in the National Security Cabinet. And we have seen a lot of this very patient and day-by-day diplomacy yield a lot of results. The goal of this pressure campaign is to persuade the North Korean regime that the only way to achieve peace and stability is to abandon its current path and embrace meaningful dialogue about a different future. The sending states ministerial comes amid the backdrop of renewed talks between North Korea and South Korea over the North's participation in next month's Winter Olympics. President Moon told President Trump that the initial talks on Tuesday went well. We will wait to see where this engagement eventually leads. As always, we are hoping for a diplomatic solution. Secretary Tillerson has been clear that we do not seek regime change or collapse. Nevertheless, we will not rest until the world is assured that the DPRK's pursuit of nuclear weapons has been verifiably abandoned. And then with that brief scene setter, I'm happy to turn it over to questions.
Matt Lee?
I'm going to defer to my colleague Matt Pennington, who is going to be on the trip.
Okay, Matt Pennington?
Yeah, I'm out here. Brian, has the complexion of this meeting in Vancouver changed because of the diplomacy that started between the North and the South? I mean, will there be a greater emphasis on seeking a diplomatic engagement with the North rather than just focusing on sanctions pressure?
I don't think it's going to change the agenda. I think you saw that the President and the Secretary were both very pleased with the interaction between the North and the South. We believe that that was brought about through, in some part, because of the pressure campaign. As I said, we believe that the sanctions, that the North Koreans are starting to feel the bite of a global pressure campaign. And we think that this creates the kind of conditions that lead to discussions between the North and the South about the Olympics. We are going to be, at this Vancouver Ministerial, doing an assessment of progress to date. We'll be discussing sanctions, the sanctions that we have done multilaterally and unilaterally to date, and their effectiveness and what we can be doing in the coming year. We'll be discussing the importance of non-proliferation, and we'll be discussing diplomatic options to achieve our goals of a denuclearized Korean Peninsula.
Andrea?
What steps would be considered to try to thwart smuggling, especially the kind of refueling we've seen at sea? Would any kind of a naval operation be considered? Some have suggested, including a former NATO Supreme Allied commander, that a naval blockade is actually the only option.
At Vancouver, we will be discussing maritime interdiction. We continue to explore all options to enhance maritime security and the ability to interdict maritime traffic, those transporting goods to and from the DPRK that support the nuclear and missile program. And we will be discussing with our partners and allies the kind of steps that we can take on maritime interdiction, and also to be cutting, disrupting funding and disrupting resources. And maritime interdiction helps us to disrupt resources, and then the financial side helps us to disrupt the financing of their nuclear and missile program.
Okay, Arshan?
How do you hope to effectively crack down on smuggling to or by North Korea, on trade, on financial transfers, without having China at such a meeting? And did the United States favor or oppose China attending the meeting?
We have had regular discussions with the Chinese about the problem that we're having about resources and funding making its way illegally to North Korea. We've been very pleased that China has certainly given much fuller implementation. I think they have closed some sanctions gaps. They are doing a better job of implementing the UN Security Council resolutions. We've had 4 UN Security Council resolutions in this administration that the Chinese supported. We also know that this is necessary but insufficient. And we need to be doing more to deal with vessels that are engaging in prohibited activities under UN Security Council resolutions. One of the things that we're looking at, we hope that the UN can list some of these vessels for port entry bans. And we think that that will demonstrate seriousness of purpose if we can start having more of these vessels listed so that we can then, they can be banned from entering other ports. We need to drive up the consequences for any vessels that are engaging in this kind of activity. With respect to China and the Vancouver Ministerial, we will give them a readout of this ministerial after it's over. And we have been in discussions with the Chinese and the Russians leading up to this Vancouver Ministerial. This is based on sending states. China and Russia were not sending states, but
On the other side, right?
they were not UN sending states.
Wouldn't your ability to impose
But
pressure
we have
be
a
much
couple more
greater
questions.
with the
Nick?
Chinese
No, but
there?
they weren't UN sending states. That was my
But
point.
wouldn't it be better, wouldn't your ability to exert pressure be greater if you had with you the largest trade partner and the regional heavyweight, China?
Well, China is working with us. This is not an alternative to everything that we are doing. This ministerial will enhance and strengthen all of the efforts underway to achieve our policy goals. China has the same policy goal in terms of ensuring that North Korea does not become a nuclear weapon state and acquire the means to deliver a nuclear warhead. So there is broad agreement in the international community about the end state. This Vancouver ministerial is something which supports all of our efforts collectively. And we have been in touch with China and Russia on this ministerial, and we will be giving them a readout when it's over and a discussion. And it will be very helpful. I think that they will welcome a lot of the actions that come out of the discussion because it all rolls up into the same policy end state.
Thank you. Nick?
Brian, what is a clear sort of concrete deliverable you hope to get out of this meeting? Is it progress toward a new Security Council resolution? Is it charting a path forward on new sanctions? And as part of this campaign, is the U.S. considering advocating for secondary sanctions against major Chinese banks to further clamp down on North Korean finances?
We very much want the Vancouver ministerial to be an assessment, an assessment of where we're making progress and areas where we need to do more. And so this will not be this is not just for sort of PR value. We want very concrete steps. We will be discussing concrete steps that we can all be taking to help increase the campaign. As we said from the beginning, this is a campaign of global and escalating pressure. It's a maximum pressure campaign. And that campaign will continue in some form or another until we achieve our policy goals, our security objectives. And the great benefit of a meeting like this is it allows many, many countries to come together and to discuss interdiction, to discuss nonproliferation, to discuss maritime activities, to discuss denying the regime the resources and the funding that it needs. And we'll also be to talk about diplomacy and how all of that fits together so that we certainly have put the credible military threat on the table, but our definite preference is for a negotiated solution.
Thank you.
Chinese
We have
banks?
Kylie Atwood.
On banks, on
Kylie?
Chinese banks, Brian? Can you just answer the
Oh,
question?
on Chinese banks. Well, we have, in our discussions, I remember when the Secretary, in his initial discussions with the Chinese, we have been very clear with them about the action that we need them to take against individuals or entities that are under Chinese control that are contributing in whatever fashion to helping or facilitating or supporting North Korea's nuclear and missile program. We've asked them to take action. They have taken action in some areas. We take secondary sanctions. We will impose secondary sanctions when we need to. And that's something which the Chinese understand very clearly from our conversations.
Okay. Kylie? Kylie is the last question.
Okay, so two quick questions. You said that the global pressure campaign that's been put forth by the U.S. is one of the reasons that created the conditions that have led to these discussions between North Korea and South Korea. Can you expand on that? Because it seems, from an outsider's perspective, that it's actually just inviting them to, talks without them actually committing to anything that you guys want them to commit to. And then the second question is, are U.S. and North Korea talks a possibility at the Olympics?
On the first question, you're saying that you don't think that the pressure campaign has, I'm not sure what you mean.
How is it creating the environment that led to these talks if it's just looking like North Korea can say they want talks, can show up at the Olympics, and they're not really, facing the heat that you guys are making the changes that you want them to make?
Well, North Korea came to the South and said that they would be willing to talk about the Olympics, and so we were pleased that that they had that conversation. It was largely limited to the Olympics. It is, you've seen what the President and the Secretary have both said about it. The President has said that he believes that this climate that we have helped to create through the pressure campaign promotes and enables and encourages this sorts of interaction. But this was largely limited to the Olympics, and there really is, I don't read much beyond it other than that. And your second question was?
Is it possible to consider U.S.-North Korea talks at the Olympics?
No.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay,
Mike.
thanks.
Thank you again. Dave, welcome. Okay, so let's go over the trip just briefly. The Secretary will leave on Monday. The meetings will take place in Vancouver on Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, he will go to Stanford, where at noon he will give a speech with open press to the Hoover Institute. He was invited by Secretary Rice, and Secretary Schultz will co-host the speech. The Secretary will speak, and then he will take questions on the podium from Secretary Rice and former Secretary Rice and former Secretary Schultz. And then after, he will then come back to New York, to Washington. Also, tomorrow morning at 10:30, the Secretary in Atchison will swear in a class, a new civil service class, and that will also be open press. Now, let's, I can start with whatever country you'd like, or we can continue questions.
Let's start with Iran.
Okay?
So I'm just curious if you could, when the Secretary was asked about Iran sanctions waivers, the President's decision this morning, he said that he's going to get a chance, I guess, to make that decision today. Some have taken that to believe that a decision and an announcement will happen today. Is that incorrect, an incorrect reading, or do you still expect this to be tomorrow?
Well, there have been ongoing discussions about this for at least a week. The Secretary, Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, and the President and others, started this at Camp David. And the Secretary's been at the White House almost every day. He was there yesterday for many, many hours. The decision meeting is this afternoon. And from that, the decision will be made. I'm not sure when the announcement will be, whether it will be tonight or whether it will be tomorrow. But we do expect a decision to be made later today.
Are you persuaded by what the European Union today, their statement, because they advocated for it to stay with the deal? Are you in any way influenced by that?
The President and the Secretary have all the facts in front of them, and ultimately it will be the President's decision. They'll have a long discussion about this today, as they have all throughout the week, and a decision will be made. Andrea?
How much have the protests, if at all, complicated a decision, given widespread analysis that any withdrawal or blowing up of the Iran deal at this point would help the hardliners and undermine any efforts towards moderation in Iran?
I don't think we should conflate the two. The fact is that we're encouraged that President Rouhani in Iran has allowed social media sites to open. We still encourage the government of Iran to allow protesters to dissent, and we hope they will continue to do so. We do not support any crackdown on dissenters. Felicia?
In October, when the Trump administration rolled out the strategy, Tillerson said that he hoped by January there'd be an agreement on legislation. Trigger points, I think is how he described them. Obviously, that legislation's not going to happen this week, but I guess, one, is the Secretary satisfied with the progress? And two, if January was the old deadline, does the administration and the Secretary have a new deadline for when they want to see that happen?
Thank you. There are 20 more days in January. But first, let's get to the decision today. And at that point, we'll make a further determination, and I'll try to give you an answer to that next week.
How involved is the secretary? I know that there's been a lot of meetings at the White House and the NSC on the legislation negotiations. How involved has the secretary been?
Secretary is very involved in all decisions relating to foreign policy. Rich?
Steve, how much do the INARA and congressional discussions have to do with the president's decision that he's going to make apparently today?
We have not halted funding to UNRWA. The decision's under review, and there's still deliberations taking place. I think we are looking at this decision for what it is, and the president will make a decision based on all the information he has, including information from the Secretary of State and from the Secretary of Defense and others. But we are confident that we will get to the right place. I would expect an announcement either later today or early tomorrow morning.
What's the right place?
Well, that's for the president to announce, and that will occur soon.
Well, but you have your own.
Hold on. Yes, ma'am. Well, hold on. Let's let everyone have the opportunity to ask one question first.
Can I go back to Vancouver meeting?
Yes.
First of all, could you please clarify if China and Russia were invited to this meeting?
No, China and Russia were not invited to the meeting, but China and Russia will be informed of the results of the meeting right when it is over. Most important to note is that China and Russia strongly support what we are doing. We're all together in belief that that North Korea must provide a plan for denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
And could you please
We all
explain-
share the same view.
Then,
Yes, sir.
In response to Rick's question, which I think was about UNRWA, in
Okay.
other words, aid to the UN.
Thank you.
Right? You then said, I'm confident that we'll get to the right place.
Yes.
When you said, I'm confident that we'll get to the right place, were you talking about Iran and the decision on Iran sanctions waivers?
I was answering the question that was asked of me.
No, I was actually asking INARA.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
INARA.
I
yes.
apologize for
Yeah,
that.
yeah. But then it sounded
Yes.
at the end that you were answering also INARA.
Yeah.
So
So
does that change the
getting
answer?
to the right
That does-
place applies to what? To INARA and Iran, or to UNRWA?
It applies to all decisions that we make. Look, the Secretary of course it does. The Secretary of State, along with the President, along with the National Security Council and others who were involved regarding Iran, have met all this week. The decision meeting is occurring currently. There'll be a decision announced on that. As it relates to any other issue, we follow the same process in making a decision.
But that decision is going to be today or tomorrow as well, the Palestinian
No,
feud?
no, I didn't say that. I
Okay.
said that, no, we did not, I did not say that that decision would be made. Deliberations are still taking place, and we've not made a decision on that. Yes,
Nazira Azim Karimi, Afghan independent journalist.
yes, ma'am.
May I ask you about the Iran situation impact to Afghanistan? Any impact to Afghanistan situation, Iran currently situation?
We will get back to you on that.
Sure.
Yes,
Alicia.
on the Vancouver meeting.
Yes.
Brian mentioned maritime interdiction would be a topic of discussion.
Yes.
Are you going to be discussing something akin to a blockade? And if that's the case, is there any concern that North Korea would take that as an act of war?
I think we'll look at all things on the table. All things will be on the table, but we've been very clear that that the sanctions have been effective, and what we want is for North Korea to come to the table. We're pleased that they are sending athletes to the Olympics. We're pleased that people from North Korea are able to go and witness the Olympics, and that they'll be marching as part of the community of nations. But that is a start. At some point, they need to come to the table, and at some point soon, with a plan for how they're going to denuclearize this peninsula, and it has to be irreversible. So until that point occurs, all things are on the table.
Hi,
Yes.
we've talked a little
Hi.
bit about who's not going to be at this summit,
Yes.
but can you offer us a little bit more specificity on who has said that they're attending and at what level?
I will get back to you with the names, but South Korea will be attending.
I have A follow-up. So, Chinese Foreign Ministry is describing this meeting as Cold War thinking because you only invite UN-sending countries. What's the reason behind it, and what's your response to Chinese criticism that this may harm the joint international effort on North Korea?
I haven't seen that statement, but with all due respect, that is not how we or our Canadian hosts would describe that meeting. We will, once the meeting is over, we will call. We will talk to our counterparts in China and Russia. We will inform them. We've been given no indication that China and Russia's position has changed regarding these sanctions, and their position is what our position is. Yes.
So it's been announced that General Mattis will be at the welcome dinner, I believe. What is his role going to be at the event?
To welcome the countries that are at the event.
Just welcoming. He's not going to be at any of the in the meetings participating?
General Mattis, of course, would likely participate in some of the meetings. I refer you to the Department of Defense, but we're pleased that General Mattis is able to be there.
Secretary.
One second. I'm sorry?
On North Korea.
Yes.
Recently, President Trump mentioned that open to talks with North Korea, but not without
preconditions. Has the U.S. changed any policy toward North Korea?
No, we've not changed our position. We're pleased that North Korea has agreed to come to to participate in the Olympic Games. That's good for South Korea and it's good for North Korea, and it will also be good for the figure skaters and others from North Korea who come to South Korea and are able to interact with people from all different nations, including the United States.
But you open to talk with North Korea with the preconditions or without the preconditions. What is that?
Our position is very clear. North Korea needs to come to the table. The president stated what our position is. The secretary has reiterated it. We need negotiation. Matt, I'm sorry. You had something? No. Okay.
Turkey.
I do, but
okay. Okay. Go ahead.
From the Financial Times.
Hi, Katrina.
Hi. Can I just check, when you say that China and Russia were not invited, is there anything in Canada suggesting they should be invited and the US in fact saying no? And can I confirm that China will in fact attend some side meetings in Vancouver?
I will get back to you on that, but Canada is hosting the meeting, and we concurred with the decision. Dimitri?
Thank you.
Please use the microphone.
Can I follow up on that one?
Okay, Elise.
Canada made the decision not to invite China and Russia, or was that made in conjunction with you and Canada?
It was made in conjunction, and again, we will inform China and Russia after the meeting where things stand. We are all in agreement that these sanctions need to be implemented. We are also in agreement that the sanctions are working, and we are also in agreement that North Korea must come to the table. Dimitri. Can you use the microphone if you don't mind?
A port entry bans idea that Ambassador Hook mentioned. Have you discussed it with the Russians and the Chinese in any way, shape, or form?
Is your question, have we discussed with the Russians and Chinese?
A port entry ban, a ban for some of the North Korean vessels to enter ports abroad.
Yes, sir. Everything that's discussed at the meeting, we will share with with Russia and with China, along with all the other countries that are at the meeting. As I said, after the meeting, we plan to contact China and Russia. Josh?
Ambassador Piet Hoekstra in the Netherlands had his debut before the Dutch media. It didn't go real well. Just to start off, does the State Department agree with his earlier comments that politicians have been burned as a result of Islamist movements and that there are no-go zones in the Netherlands?
No, the State Department does not agree with those statements. That is not the language that we would use.
Would you like the ambassador to maybe retract those, given all of the controversy it seems to be causing?
The ambassador, when he was an ambassador designate in December, when this initially started, issued a statement on Twitter that said, for the last 17 years, I've been passionate about confronting the global threat of terrorism. The person Josh is referring to is Piet Hoekstra, who was sworn in yesterday as the ambassador to the Netherlands, former member of Congress from Michigan. This has been a long struggle. We still have much to learn. I made certain remarks in 2015 and regret the exchange during the Nusur interview. Please accept my apology. I was born in the Netherlands and love this country. It will be the greatest honor of my life to serve as the United States ambassador to the Netherlands. I look forward to the opportunity to learn, to listen, and to move on in the spirit of peace and friendship with the people and the leaders of the Netherlands. Merry Christmas and a blessed New Year. His position on that hasn't changed. I agree that yesterday that the ambassador did not answer some of the questions that were asked of him. He recognizes that. He is going to do a long-form interview tomorrow, that is the plan, with a Dutch outlet. And he also plans over the weekend to be available within many of the communities in the capital, including Muslim communities. And it is a great honor for Ambassador Hoekstra to serve as the Netherlands, we are hopeful that we can move beyond this. He's excited about the opportunity to be able to help the people of the Netherlands.
Well, the quickest way to move beyond it, it seems to me, would be for him to actually say that he was mistaken or incorrect in 2015 when he made the comments that have got the Dutch upset. No?
He did say in December that he made certain remarks in 2015 and regrets the exchange, and I've indicated.
But the remarks that he made in 2015 weren't just something that you apologized. They were wrong. It was factually incorrect.
Right, but I've indicated that
apologizing for them is
Yes.
one thing, but he was asked yesterday to retract them.
Yes.
Which he did not do.
But I've indicated clearly that that is not the view of the
Does
department.
that mean that the department has told him that he should retract his comments?
The department has had conversations with the ambassador. The ambassador wants to get this behind him. He is very committed to serving the people of the Netherlands as a United States representative. This is the greatest honor of his life. And he, again, he will be
the
giving.
people of the United States.
He will
which is
be.
why he's there.
I appreciate that. He will be giving an interview tomorrow, and he will be available throughout the Netherlands. And I have advised, as I've advised most people, that when reporters are in front of you, just as you are in front of me, that it's always good to answer questions.
So does that mean that he will? When he is asked in this interview tomorrow, which he certainly will be, I'm sure he will be.
I think you should.
If he still thinks or still believes that there are no-go zones in the Netherlands and that politicians have been set on fire,
Right.
will he answer the question?
You should turn into that interview tomorrow. I've been very clear on what our position is.
That those statements were inaccurate.
Well, I did say that. I said that's not the position of the Department
No,
of
that's
State.
different. It's different. Not the position of the Department of State is different from those statements are inaccurate.
I've been very clear that that's not our position. That is not language that we would use, and that's not language you will ever hear me use or Heather use from this podium. Let's
Can you just say that it's wrong?
Let's do one at a time.
Can you just say that what he said in 2015 on this television show is just factually incorrect? It doesn't have any basis of truth.
I've been very clear on what our position is. I'm not sure how I can be more clear other than to make the point that
You
is
can say
that is not the view.
Before the election, in 2015, 3 years ago almost, that he made some comments on a television show that were incorrect.
The ambassador
That's
said.
how you get it behind. That's how
Right.
you get it.
I appreciate that PR advice, and I share your view, by the way.
Well,
The
good.
ambassador made remarks in 2015, and he said very clearly that he regrets the exchange.
Yeah, but that doesn't
I think
mean
you
that he
will,
thinks
if you
that
tune
he-
into the interview tomorrow, he will address this issue. This is those comments were not the position of the State Department, and you will never hear those words from this podium or in any form.
What do you expect him to say? Do you expect him to say that, that he was wrong?
Matt, let's let some other people ask some questions. With all due respect, let's let some other
Representing
people.
the United States to countries where they have previously made factually incorrect statements about the country where they are sent to represent the United States. Why, as a matter of policy, does the State Department have an ambassador who's made inaccurate statements about the country he's now working in on behalf of the U.S. people?
The ambassador made mistakes in 2015, made comments that should not have been made. He recognizes that. He apologized in December. He is doing an interview tomorrow. He is honored to be the ambassador. He's been received well by the Dutch government, and we hope that he can be received well by the people of the Netherlands. And we have made clear to the ambassador that he must move to get this behind him, and he definitely understands that. He feels great remorse. Yes, sir.
Thanks, sir. On Turkey, two quick questions.
Well, hold on. Okay, I'll get back to you, Dave.
No, but I'm on this topic. This is Turkey.
Well, okay, Dave.
Sorry.
I'll get right back to you. I apologize.
Yesterday, the State Department issued its new way of doing travel warnings, travel advisories.
Yes.
Holland, or the Netherlands, was given a 1 rating as a place you don't need to exercise any particular precaution going to. Obviously, you've just said you don't believe there are any no-go zones in Holland, whatever the ambassador may have said. Are there any no-go zones because of Islamic extremism in any country of the European Union?
I'll get back to you on that question. That's not the language that we would use, as I said. Yes.
Thank you. Two quick questions on Turkey. One is there any way you can first describe to us the relationship between Turkey and U.S.? And the second question is, Turkish President Erdogan just yesterday once again accused U.S. government for plotting another coup. And many leading Turkish officials have been accusing Turkey almost day in and day out. These accusations are coming from Ankara to your government. Can you respond to these accusations?
It's in our national interest for Turkey to be a stable, democratic, prosperous, and reliable ally. We don't believe language, as you indicated. It moves that, helps us move to that goal. That it's understandable that Turkey, like most countries, seeks good relationships with his neighbors. We've long supported, and we continue to support, Turkey's democratic development because we believe that respect for the rule of law, judicial independence, and freedom of the press are sources of Turkey's strength and expand our potential for partnership.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, sir. You talked about that they are still deliberating on the issue of UNRWA, the Palestinian Relief and Works Agency.
Yes.
Now, are these deliberations, are they just internal deliberations, or are you talking to other contributors like European countries, like the UN itself and so on, to see, how this money in the past has been spent and which areas and so on?
I can't give any further guidance than what I did on Tuesday.
Right.
In making decisions, we ask all interested parties to provide us with their view before a decision is made. Those deliberations are continuing. Yes, in the back. I'm sorry.
One quick
Well,
follow-up.
hold on. I've made our point clear on this question.
I understand.
I want to be fair to everybody in the room, and we have at least 10 people asking questions.
It's the issue. I have more questions.
I appreciate your comments, but I've been clear on our position. Yes, ma'am.
That's not on this issue, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
It's on, sir,
I'll
on
come,
another issue.
with all due respect, I'll come back to you, but let's
we
let other
focus on
people
one
ask a
issue at a
question.
time.
Yes, ma'am.
Was North Korea invited to the Vancouver meeting? Was it ever considered? And is there a bilat scheduled for Secretary Tillerson and Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa?
North Korea was not invited to the meeting. North Korea has not indicated that they are ready to put down their nuclear weapons and to denuclearize. That has to occur before they would be invited to any such meeting. I do believe that the Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister of South Korea will have an opportunity to interact. 1 second, Nike. Right behind you. I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Cindy Sain, Voice of America.
Hi.
Following up on the travel advisories, Russia did not seem to be too pleased with its ranking on the new system, and the Foreign Ministry put out a statement saying that if U.S. citizens go to Russia en masse, they would be able to see with their own eyes there's not a trace of what U.S. officials are routinely trying to frighten them with. Do you have a response to that, and possibly an update from Ambassador Huntsman being here?
Well, those are two completely different issues.
Fair.
Ambassador Huntsman was here as part of a routine set of visits to Washington, D.C. He met with the Secretary. He was on the Hill for a day and a half. He met with different people in the department, including me. We had the opportunity to talk for over an hour about public diplomacy matters and his support for how we can help enhance what we're doing within Russia, and so that relates to that. As it relates to your question regarding Russia's hyperbole concerning visitation, if people would read look on the website and see what was said, the only goal in the rating system is to help people be safe as they visit countries. If people want to visit Russia, that's within their purview. As long as they follow the appropriate, get the appropriate passport and visa, that absolutely, and book the appropriate plane flights or a boat trip, that's their opportunity. And so, I just don't want to engage comments like that. They really don't serve any purpose, and in some ways, they discourage Americans from wanting to go there. Yes, ma'am.
There are reports that Prime Minister Abe is considering not attending the Olympics because of recent statements by President Moon about the issue of comfort women. Is the State Department talking to Prime Minister Abe to encourage him to attend the Olympics?
I will get back to you on that. We hope for the country of South Korea that the Olympics is a well-attended event. It's an opportunity for all the nations to come together in sport and to support our athletes. That is what the Olympics is about. It's about the figure skaters and the skiers and the people that do slalom and biathletes and all others, and the luge and every other sport that we in this room like. And curling, Andrea mentioned curling, without a doubt, a very interesting sport. My spouse likes that. And there's no indoor rowing in the Winter Olympics, but in 2 years I will come back to you and talk to you about that in the Summer Olympics if I'm so lucky. Nike?
To ask a quick question on Serbia regarding the visa rejection of its army chief's visa application to the United States. I understand the State Department usually don't comment on individual visa case. That said, could you please address the possible repercussion and then respond to Serbia government's comments that there would be consequence in the bilateral relationship?
We just don't discuss any issue relating to the issuance of a visa.
So, on the same subject, also apparently the Foreign Minister of Argentina denied a visa to come for medical treatment. And there are instances in which you do discuss visa cases, visa denials, and those instances are when the person who was rejected speaks publicly about them, about it. And that has happened, and I don't know about the Serbia case, but has happened with the Argentina case. Can you speak to that?
I can't, but I'll be glad to get back to you on that.
Can
I will come back to you, but let's, yes, ma'am.
Hi, Chia from United Day News Taiwan.
Yes.
You have expressed concerns about China's unilateral actions to fly through M503 route. But have you talked to your Chinese counterpart about this? And Taiwan has been asking to communicate with China, but they haven't responded yet. So have you encouraged Chinese to talk with Taiwan?
I will get back to you on that.
The question.
Okay, go ahead.
Has U.S. contact ICAO on
I'll
this?
say that again. I apologize.
Has U.S. contacted ICAO regarding this unilateral announcement? Because this is about aviation safety issue. Taiwan government hope that all the friends and other government can help to convey the message.
Right. So when decisions are made, we communicate with all affected parties. Yes.
Yesterday, the Democrats on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee came out with this report about Russia's influence campaign abroad. And among the recommendations was a call for like an international, effort with allies on the kind of following the model of the coalition to defeat ISIL. Is the State Department, is the Secretary of State behind that kind of a recommendation?
We have a global engagement center in the Department of State that whose funding was increased, actually, and whose job it is to work on the interdiction of ISIS and Boko Haram and others who pose a threat to United States citizens and the citizens of our allies. And we also are very focused on the issue of disinformation, and we are happy that Congress agrees with our intelligence community's assessment.
Is the Secretary behind creating an effort specifically to counter disinformation from Russia?
We have a mechanism designed to do that called the Global Engagement Center, as I indicated, which is funded, and whose job it is to focus on the issue of disinformation, whether it comes from Russia or China or any other country. Andrea?
The report is specifically criticized the State Department for not activating that Global Engagement Center adequately, saying that Congress had put the money in, but that it has not seriously taken its mission and is behind the curve on this, and said that the president is guilty of negligence for not doing what the other countries have done to challenge Russia and defend against Russia.
We take the threat of disinformation very seriously. The Global Engagement Center reports to the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy. I meet with them very frequently. They've been doing excellent work as it relates to the issue of disinformation and along with interdiction. And they frequently brief the Hill. I received several questions on that during my hearing. And we respect Senator Cardin, but we don't share the view that the Department of State or the administration is lacking in that regard. I can tell you that I and my colleagues are very committed to this issue. That it does what that report is missing is a list of what we have done and what we continue to do. We are awaiting additional funding, which we have been told that we will receive from the Department of Defense in the next couple of months. That hasn't prevented us, though, from doing the work that we've had to do.
So the report was focused not only on disinformation.
Yes.
It talked about a range of behavior that really runs the gamut of what they call hybrid threats. That disinformation is just a small part of it.
Well, that's what you asked about, though. But I appreciate that. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I said a global influence campaign.
Okay.
And that, in their view, includes things like corruption and money laundering and transnational crime groups and all kinds of other efforts that they're saying, that it's not just a disinformation campaign, but it's a kind of a broad spectrum threat. And what they're saying, what the Democrats on the Foreign Relations Committee are saying, is that it requires a different approach than what the State Department is doing.
We believe we have a mechanism in place to address these issues, and we are going forward in doing that. We are very respectful of Senator Cardin and the Democrats on the committee, and we've read the report and with great interest. But to say that we are not moving forward on this, that this is not an issue of importance to us, is just not accurate in all of the areas that you mentioned. Josh?
Ecuador has granted WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange citizenship. Wondering if you have any reaction to that decision. He's obviously been holed up in their embassy for quite a long time. And is the U.S. still looking to arrest and charge, Mr. Assange?
Right. Well, that's a decision. The decision to grant Julian Assange citizenship is a decision between Julian Assange and the country of Ecuador, and we don't discuss whether we are considering bringing Julian Assange to the United States for trial.
So that means that the administration has no feelings, no thoughts on the Ecuadorian decision?
Well, we have feelings and thoughts on most issues.
Right. So what are they on this specific issue?
On this
and
specific,
maybe not feelings, but
right.
thoughts.
But on this specific issue, we don't discuss what our actions will or will not be.
I'm not asking you about your actions.
I appreciate that.
I want to know whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that the Ecuadorians...
That's just not something we would discuss at the present time. This decision just occurred within the past 2 hours, I believe.
Another question regarding Pakistan policy. What will be the next step of decision of United States toward Pakistan if Pakistan still keep its old policy toward Afghanistan and United States? Any update?
As it relates to the decision that we made?
Yeah.
We would hope that Pakistan would come to the table and that they would turn over those terrorists that we have asked be turned over. We've indicated very clearly that we believe that can happen. We've only suspended the aid. We have not reallocated the money So now it is the job of Pakistan to take seriously their commitment to us and, most importantly, to the people of Pakistan, who would most be hurt by this, by another terrorist, any terrorist activity, and come forward. So our position hasn't changed. They have not yet come forward to answer your follow-up question. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us now precisely what is the amount of foreign military financing that the U.S. State Department will suspend pursuant to the President's decision? You had previously said, I think, or an NSC spokesman had said it was about $1 billion, including. Yes. But it's a week later, and I wonder if you now have the actual number.
I'll get back to you with the number. You're correct. That is the number that we use, something close to $1 billion. It's a series of dollars in different areas that would have to be put together.
Yep.
But again, you know, our hope, we haven't reallocated the money. Our hope is that Pakistan will do the right thing for the people of Pakistan, because they should want to root out terrorists in their country as much as we want to root out terrorists in their country.
On Pakistan,
Yes,
and
sir.
I brought this up earlier. I don't know if there's an answer to it or not, but do you have anything on any kind of recent interaction with the government of Pakistan on the situation, the case of Dr. Afridi?
I don't, but I will check on that and I'll get back to you later today.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
On Pakistan, we understand that officials have said they will stop sharing intelligence and already have stopped sharing intelligence from sources on the ground on the Afghan border with the US. What's your reaction to that? Have they informed you of that? Are you making efforts to see if that's correct? And
No,
take
they have
action?
not informed us of that, and I checked on that at 1:45 Eastern Time, and as of that point, that had not occurred.
You anticipate they unilaterally cut off the supply?
Because, as Matt noted, I have feeling, I am hopeful that Pakistan will do the right thing and turn over the terrorists and honor their commitment. Yes, sir.
You've been very vocal from the podium about asking the Iranians to release people that have been arrested at protests and
Yes.
also to give them free access to the web. Tunisia has arrested 600 protesters in recent days. Do the Tunisians have a right to protest in the same way? Also, Saudi Arabia has held blogger Raif Badawi now for 3 years and has lashed him. He wanted access to the internet.
Well, the protests that are currently going on in Tunisia relate to long-standing economic issues. We believe that people in all countries should have the right to dissent, and we encourage nations to allow that to occur, and that would include Tunisia. Raif
Badawi in Saudi Arabia?
We don't.
Just 2 days ago was the 3rd anniversary of him being
Yes.
jailed for 10 years.
Any person who is in the media, who is trying to do their job, and has been punished for participating in trying to provide information to that country through freedom of the press, should be afforded appropriate considerations. And it's not just as it relates to the blogger in Saudi Arabia, but there are journalists in prison in many countries, and those countries should try to address these issues as quickly as possible.
You stated that U.S. government is supporting Turkey as a stable, democratic, reliable ally, yet we hear these accusations are coming every day. Do you think there is a problem, an issue in communication channels between these two allies, U.S. and Turkey?
All we believe that the government of Turkey could be a strong ally to the United States, and communication with all nations is important. That is as far as I can go on that.
Strong ally? They're a NATO ally.
Yes, they're a NATO ally. Absolutely.
Are they a strong ally?
Yes, they're a strong ally, but there's always work to be done with each, as we work with each nation. And they tell us their concerns, and we tell nations our concerns, and we work together to try to reach agreement. And when we have concerns, we address those. And if they have concerns about something that's happening in the United States, they address that with us. That's no different than Turkey or any other nation.
Is Turkey attending the Vancouver meeting?
I'll get back to you on that. No, I don't believe they are. But I don't believe they are.
They were.
Right. I'll get back to you on
Yeah,
that.
if you remember ever watching MASH.
I did.
Yes, well, then you remember that the Turks were there.
Yes. I did watch MASH. I was about 3 years old, but I did watch it. Wait a minute. I don't know if I like all that laughter there. I said the only part about getting older is that it used to be when I was 50, people would go, oh, you look like you're 35. But now that I'm in my 60s, people go, oh, you look like you're 58. And I said, I don't know if I consider that such a compliment.
Yeah, thank you.
Does anyone new have a question before I go back to the others? Well, now, let me just do 2 more questions.
Before you get back to
I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you a very quick question that Irshad raised the other day on the settlements. He asked you a question on the building of, or the plans for building 1,329 illegal settlements, and you said that you would get back to him. Have you gotten any answer on that?
President Trump has made clear while the existence of settlements are not in themselves an impediment to peace, further unrestrained settlement activity does not help advance peace. The Israeli government has made clear that going forward its intent to adopt a policy regarding settlement activity that takes the president's concern into consideration, and the United States welcomes this. And we're hard at work on trying to develop a comprehensive peace plan that would benefit both Israelis and Palestinians, and it will be unveiled when the time is right.
That's all well and good, but
that
statement is almost a year old now.
Yes, well, that's the position that we have.
In the time between that when that statement was first made and now, there have been thousands of new settlement construction projects announced. So the question is, are you satisfied with the Israeli response to the president's expression of concern about this, or are you not satisfied?
We believe that it is in the government's interest to adopt a policy regarding settlement activity. We're working towards that. I can't go any further.
They seem to have adopted a policy of building more.
I've stated what our position is.
I'll say its previous question.
Our position will not change in the past 30 seconds, but I'm happy to answer.
On the UNRWA funding, is it your understanding that if UNRWA no longer has any money, that the responsibility for the refugees devolves on the occupying power?
I think you're making an assumption of what will occur, and that's not an assumption that I would make. We have not halted funding to UNRWA. The decision is under review. There's still deliberations taking place. Let's not make. Let's wait until that deliberation occurs.
But it is the responsibility of an occupying power to look after refugees.
It's the responsibility of the Secretary of State to make a decision on that, and he will after he's had appropriate deliberation. One more question, right in the back, right there. Well, we don't have a timetable to be expected, but
so
when
it is
does
wide open.
Well, we don't have a timetable to be expected, but when it does occur, I will let you know. We'll be up here for as long as you need me, and I appreciate you taking the time today. I hope all of you have a nice Thursday and a good weekend. Thank you so much.